I, okay, wa alaikum salam. So it's become such a habit now. You can't.
Earliest times, in the earliest period of Islam, there were Malik, Hanbali, four groups out there, and due to inaccessibility of correct information, this has given rise to these differences. And further, we told that one should not go for fatwa shopping. Despite he go to the book, he go deep into the subject and try to learn the truth, and Allah will guide him. Or is any literature available on the internet, so that we can also get benefited from this.
Okay, in terms of literature, wherever scholars are bringing the evidence for the positions that they held, we can call this in general Salafi literature. Meaning they're not just giving the opinion, that opinion, the other opinion, but they're bringing evidence from Quran, from Hadith, etc., etc. That is a general guideline that we should follow. If you pick up a book and all you see is the opinion of the author, maybe he only mentions verses of the Quran, you don't find him mentioning anything of the Hadith, or you don't find him mentioning anything of the position of the Sahaba, then beware. This book is an opinionated book. He's just giving his opinion. Whereas those where they are bringing the evidences to support their positions, etc., then this is a part of the Salafi methodology. But now, at the same time, I'm not saying that every single book which follows this methodology may itself be truly on that methodology. Meaning that there are some people, after this methodology has become popular, and people have responded to it because they feel, as people have become more educated. In the past, where people were used to the priest, layman way, where you go to the priest and the priest just tells you, do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that. You don't ask the priest why. He just tells you, you just take it and you do it. So the Maulana, the past, it used to be like this. You come to the Maulana, you don't question. He tells you this, you don't question him. So as another generation has come up, where people have been more exposed to education, and the inquiry and the inquisitive method, etc., has become popular, people want to know why. What is your evidence? So now people now lean towards those people who say, here is the evidence. We're not just saying do it this way, we're saying here is the evidence, this is the evidence, so and so. And those who tend to be focused in this methodology tend to be those attributed themselves to the Salafi way. So now what happens is that those people who find that this is now challenging them and their way, they have now also put out some books where they've brought all their evidences also, So you can see they have been influenced. Now they're obliged to do this, to give legitimacy to their way. Now, how to distinguish between one who is following it, really presenting you the truth, and one who is following it in defense of his madhab? Now, for the average person, he may not be able to distinguish that. So this is where you're going to take books. You check with those who are more knowledgeable than you. Is this a reliable book? Is this author known to be following that methodology, etc., etc.? So, this just saves you from a lot of misinformation. It's not to say that we're not capable of reading and understanding ourselves, but there's so many books on the market today. So many books on the market. In general, the majority that follow this way are following that path, but we said there is a minority that is also in defense of the fanatical approach to madhab, etc. So how to distinguish? I said, go and ask those most knowledgeable amongst us, and they will give us guidance in this matter. As Allah said in the Quran, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask those who know if you don't know. Any particular book. There are many, many books, you see, because there's not just one book which, for example, in fiqh, we could take fiqh al-sunnah. Fiqh al-sunnah, though Imam or Sheikh Sayyid Sabiq, was from a Shafi'i background, he was from the movement, the Ikhwan movement, etc. However, he understood the importance of the bringing of the positions of the various madhabs together and choosing, in fact, what is most authentic. So he took that path. You have that similar statements and writings to some degree with Shah Waliullah Dahlawi. You have some of his writings and sayings in that direction. But it doesn't mean every single thing he wrote is okay. But in terms of issues of madhab, etc., he also promoted the idea of coming back and following the madhab of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then, in terms of modern books, in English, books are limited. If you're talking about English, you're asking me in English, right? Or you're asking me in Arabic? Which books are you asking? English or Arabic? Or Urdu? Well, I really don't know about Urdu. I don't speak Urdu, so I can't really speak on it. But in terms of books which are useful for fiqh issues, you have books like Bulugh al-Maram. This has also been translated. Subul al-Salam. These are books in fiqh. More recently, there's a book called Al-Wajiz, which has focused on the authentic fiqh hadiths. And in each subject, for example, even to Sirah, you have books which have now been done. This is in Arabic, Sahih Sirah Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where scholars now have compiled only authentic hadiths describing the Sirah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There are books like this. The closest one to it is that of Mubarak Furi, this Rahiq al-Makhtoum. This is one of the better ones, but it's not as accurate. There are more accurate works which have been done in Arabic which haven't been translated into English as yet. And in every subject, in every area, you will find, similar books. You ask the knowledgeable scholars amongst you and they can identify these books for you. Go ahead. Oh, okay. You're back to Assalamu alaikum.
Now, there is no fanatism among the Muslims at all over the world. Is it possible to follow the Madhab of Rasul among the humanist countries of the world?
Among the humanist countries of the world?
Among the humanist countries of the world.
What are the humanist countries?
Humanist countries are those countries which are not following the Sharia.
Which are not following?
Which are not following the Sharia.
Sharia.
They are not following. There is no fanatism among the Muslims all over the world.
Okay. The first. Okay. The first statement that there's no fanaticism among the Muslims of the world today is not correct. It's not correct. The very beginning isn't correct. It's not correct. You are you do you represent the ummah?
I'm not the only person. They are all of them are there.
No. Anyway, brother. The point is for those who know the ummah, who have been to different parts of the Muslim world, for sure the disease of madhab fanaticism is still alive. Its effects have been reduced. It is not as evident. You don't see anybody saying you can't marry a Shafi'i today. I mean, that has been overcome. We are praying behind one imam now. This in general, that does exist, but the elements of madhab fanaticism remains. It still remains. There's still a long way to go to correct, to clean up, and to come back really to the madhab of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when Muslims come back to that madhab, then the Sharia will be properly implemented in the different parts of the Muslim ummah. And from there, inshallah, Muslims can then seek to implement it in other parts which are not currently a part of the ummah. But that is the foundation. We have to return back to that madhab en masse. When we do that, we produce leaders amongst us who will work together to bring the ummah back together and implement the Sharia in the various parts as it should be implemented.
We have the next question from the sister's side.
Brother, my question is not calling yourself a Muslim a title
Okay, question. Isn't it better to call ourselves a Muslim than to call ourselves a Salafi? Well, in general, we are all Muslims, inshallah. However, if a person who believes that Abu Bakr, Omar, and Uthman were apostates who stole the Khilafah from Ali, and that Ali knows the future and the past, that he had control over the atoms of the universe, and so did his grandchildren, 12 of them, and that person calls himself a Muslim, are you the same as him? No, that's where we got the term Sunni. We had to come up with Sunni to distinguish ourselves from those who call themselves Muslims but have that other belief. And then they were called Shi'i. Right? And we accept Sunni and Shi'i. Okay. So now we have Sunni. People who call themselves Sunni. Among the people who call themselves Sunni are those who, for example, maybe they follow another prophet, like the Ahmadis. They consider themselves to be Sunnis. Though the Muslim world has said that they are not Muslims at all, but they consider themselves Muslims and Sunnis. So we have a name to distinguish them, Ahmadi, to distinguish them that they are in fact not from the Muslim Ummah, that the term Sunni alone may also include those who are fanatic about their madhab, and a variety of other practices they may hold. You may, for example, you may find the Barelwis, who consider themselves to be Sunnis, but they believe Prophet ﷺ is alive in his grave. You can stand for him in your gatherings, you can go and pray to him and everything, you call on him. So we have another term to distinguish those Muslims who are Sunnis from those who are Barelwis, who are following something else, who consider themselves to be Sunnis. And the term we use is Salafis. It's only a distinguishing term where necessary. Of course, we are first and foremost Muslims. These additional terms, and they were used by the scholars of the past. They were used by the Imams. Distinguish. We have the Mu'tazilites in their set of beliefs, though they were Sunnis, but they had another set of beliefs with regards to Allah's names and attributes. So we have terms only to distinguish ourselves from those who are not in fact following Islam as it was revealed by Allah and conveyed to us by Rasoolullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions.
Suppose if a person is in a particular country where there's a group which is following Quran and Sunnah, can he associate himself with that group?
Can a Muslim brother or sister associate themselves with a group in a particular country who call to the Quran and Sunnah? Of course. Ta'awanu alal birri wa taqwa. Allah tells us to cooperate with each other in righteousness and piety. So we cooperate with them. But now if they're calling you to make bay'ah, you make an oath of allegiance, and you have to follow this sheikh or this peer or whatever else, though they're saying Quran and Sunnah, but they have this other thing there, then no. You don't need to become a card-carrying member of any organization. You cooperate. Organizations are there to help to implement the Quran and Sunnah. You cooperate with them to that end. Not that you create an entity where you now become a part of it as exclusive and different from those who are not a part of it. So then, you start to look at, they have what they call the us and them mentality. Where that starts to develop. This is dangerous. And where you end up calling people not to Islam anymore, but to the group. You want to practice Islam? Come to us. So you're calling people to yourselves as opposed to calling them to Islam. So we have to be careful that we don't replace the fanatic madhabism of the past with fanatic organization, a factionalism of the present. Where some groups you'll find, I know there's some groups, for example, they use the term fi sabilillah, right? You're on the path. Right? Now, what does this fi sabilillah mean? It doesn't mean that if you do something for the sake of Allah, you're fi sabilillah. No, it means if you do it our way. If you don't go out for 3 days or for this number or, set program, you do it this way, and if you don't do that, no matter what you do, which could be far greater than that little going from one master to another, you're fi sabilillah here, and no, you're not fi sabilillah there. This is groupism. This is the signs of groupism, where your whole activities are focused and your understanding of the deen is focused in the interpretation of that organization alone. This is dangerous. And it creates factions. And the division into factions is not something pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
What are the scholars doing that all Muslims follow one madhab, including the Shiites, so that common man is not confused what he is supposed to do actually, whether he's a Sunni or whether he's a Shiite? Why it has taken so long for the scholars to not come to this platform?
Well, the question of why. This is Allah's qadar. The whys go back to Allah's qadar. This is the situation that we are in. Because of historical factors which have split up the ummah into different groups, countries with separate entities and bodies and all these kind of things, there's so much division. People have inherited so much division from the colonial era and before it. It took hundreds of years to create it. Don't think it's going to go away in 5 or 10. It's going to take time. And the foundation is correct knowledge. That is the foundation. As that correct knowledge is spread gradually, these barriers, these things are broken down and people can come together. But it has to be through working on a base level, spreading that knowledge. Because people try to do it from the top, but from the top down doesn't work. You have to build it from the bottom up. Among the scholars, there are scholars who have tried to work together to do certain things. You have, for example, in Mecca, they have a Majma' al-Fiqhi, where scholars gather from different parts of the Muslim world, with all their different, backgrounds, etc., and they tackle different current issues that are facing Muslims, giving it to some among them to research it and bring the evidence back, and they come to a consensus as to what is the best way to deal with this thing. This is a part of that step, and that has been going on for some years now,
Standard of the way, the common man loses his temper, starts fighting rather than going on talking to one.
Well, the point is that enlightenment, it needs to spread not only in the base, but also amongst the scholars. Because you still have a body of scholars who are still fanatical, promoting the madhab and these kind of things, and they're very rigid about it. And you still have schools producing students with this same mentality. So that's the point, is that we don't need to worry about when. What we need to worry about is now, what can we do? What can I do personally to correct my knowledge, improve the knowledge of my family, my generation, my friends, my neighborhood. I try to focus on what is within my reach, what is in my grasp.
The next question from the ladies' side.
Many people ask us, what method do we follow for daily prayers and guidelines? Is it mandatory for us to belong or to associate to any one madhab? For any common man, a Sunni Muslim, does he has to be associated with a one madhab?
Sister's question, is it necessary for a person to be associated with one madhab? Yes. the madhab of Rasoolullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So if somebody asks you, what madhab are you following? You say, I'm following the madhab of Rasoolullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. His madhab, the madhab of his companions, and the madhab of the imams, etc.
Can we have the question from brother who's standing? Is it correct to use the term Salafi? There are three issues involved in this. Firstly, is it the way of the Prophet to say that we are Salafis? Second issue is that this again promotes the same danger which you spoke of a couple of minutes back, that it would increase the spirit of sectarianism or factionalism amongst Muslims if we say us against them. We are Salafis and they are non-Salafis. It would promote that sort of a thinking. And where does it all lead us to? Is it the way of the Prophet, and why should we have a term being used which was not used in the Quran, where we have been asked to describe ourselves as Muslims? So where would this lead us again? Why do we need to use this term? The third issue that arises is, even among Salafis there's a lot of dispute and factionalism. We have Salafis in India who may not be following the way of the Prophet. How do you distinguish between correct distilled Salafis from the ones who are not correct or accurate in the practice of the way of the Prophet?
Okay, the issue of the term Salafi. As I mentioned before, this term was used by the early generation of scholars. You can find it mentioned amongst the Imams and scholars from that era, from those who came after them. So the term is already in usage, right? And they didn't mean by it division or divisiveness. Now, to say, well, since Prophet Muhammad ﷺ did not use that term, then basically you restrict yourself, because this is only a linguistic usage. We use adjectives to describe nouns, right? Salafi is just an adjective which we describe the noun Muslim with. That's all it is. No more, no less. As we use Sunni, as we may use Brelwi, or we may use any other Shi'i or whatever, these are terms used for description. Fundamentally, yes, we are Muslims. But because of the fact that Muslims have taken a number of different paths, these adjectives are used to distinguish which of the paths you're talking about. But, as I said before, it is not necessary, and it should not be, that the term be used as a means of beating people. It is only for clarification, and the understanding of that term is what needs to be spread. And that's where the focus should be, not so much on the term, because as I said, from the whole talk that I presented, 1 hour, etc., you only heard me say Salafi at the very end. Right? I didn't start off with Salafi, you heard me Salafi. No. I said it at the very end to clarify that is what that term means. So it means it is not a dishonorable term. It should not be misunderstood. Understand it in its context. You may use it in its context. When it is for clarification purposes, you recognize, yes, I'm following that way. The term used in Arabic for those who follow that way is called Salafi. No, the just second part of his question, which was, how do we distinguish between authentic Salafis and inauthentic Salafis? As I said before, we have a criterion, right? The criterion is back to the Quran and the Sunnah. If we find people who call themselves Salafis and are in contradiction to what we know from the methodology of the Prophet ﷺ and his companions and the early scholars, etc., then we have to reject their claim. Because of course anybody can claim anything. A person may claim, I'm a Muslim. But when you look at what he's doing in his life, etc., you say, really, this guy's not a Muslim. So in the same way, anybody who claims anything, then we have to use what is the criterion of determining the basis of that claim. If he agrees with that criterion, then we say, yes, this person is the genuine product. Otherwise we say he's fake, counterfeit.
As you just answered to the question posed by brother, that you have to distinguish by saying to it that who is the true follower of the Quran and the Sunnah. So my question is that can't we distinguish amongst the Muslim who is the true follower of Quran and Sunnah without giving the name Salafi? And as you said in your talk that if you ask to happen any of these scholars, the great scholars of Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Sahabi or Tabi'i, what your mazhab is, they won't say Shafi, Maliki, Hanbali, etc. So my question is, are they going to say my mazhab is Salafi?
The answer to that is, what does Salafi mean? We know what Maliki means, we know what Shafi'i means. What does Salafi mean? The one who says, I'm following the madhab of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, that is the one who is Salafi. Salafi is not a madhab in the sense of a madhab amongst the madahib, amongst the different madhabs. No, it is just an understanding of the Quran and the Sunnah as it was by the Sahaba and the early generation. Because again, as I said, it's not just saying Quran and Sunnah, because Quran and Sunnah can be according to different interpretations. If these interpretations are in conflict with the understanding of the Sahaba, then those interpretations are rejected. So when we say the term Salafi, what we're saying is we understand the Quran and Sunnah as it was understood by the Sahaba and those leading scholars who followed them. I mean, the point is, we don't need to make a mountain out of a molehill, because this is what's happening. People are saying, no, what was it? I can't call myself a Salafi. Why? Well, okay, because for da'wah's sake, Salafis, say for example here, have made a bad name for what Salafi is. So you say, okay, I don't want to call myself because I don't want to be associated with them, but I believe in the thing. Fine. I'm not saying you must call yourself a Salafi, otherwise you're not. No, I'm not saying that. So the point is, understand what it is, understand what the call really means. If you find that in the circumstance of the people you're dealing with, they have a bad impression, then you avoid using the term until such time as their understanding is clear. Then you can say, okay, well, that's what it actually is. And that comes back to now hikmah in giving the da'wah.
The followers of all the four imams have a different method of praying. I would like to ask you, which is the right method and which is the best book on prayer?
Well, the easiest answer, I think the best book describing the prayer of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is that of Sheikh Nasruddin al-Albani. The prayer of the Prophet. It's been translated into English. It's available. I'm sure, I think IRF has it available here. That is the best book that I have seen, based on the fact that he brings the evidences for all of the various positions that are taught there. And all of these things you will find in the different madhabs. That's why, really, an individual madhab does not encompass all of the sunnah. But if you bring all the madhabs together, then the sunnah will be contained in their rulings. But not every single ruling. Right? So you'll find some rulings which are incorrect, some which are correct. But if you look within the madhabs, you will find the sunnah encompassed. But a single madhab will not encompass the whole of the sunnah. It has a portion of it. And then there are also errors in some of the rulings.
Next question from the brother's side. Yes, brother.
As long as the understanding of Madhab of Rasulullah is concerned, you say one need not be rigid or fanatic.
Okay.
We must accept the other literatures and other books. We mustn't be so rigid to Shafi'i or Hanafi.
Okay.
But outside these four madhabs, if I can, other madhabs are concerned, or other people who claim to be Muslims, other groups of Muslims are there. Sunnis, Brelvis, and so many other groups. Can we study the literature as long as it can bring some knowledge to us and we can understand our Madhab of Rasulullah? If it's not contradicting to our thinking and our basics.
Okay, we started off by saying, I said that we should not be fanatic about the madhab of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I would say no. We should be fanatic about the madhab of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That is where fanaticism is praiseworthy, right? Fanaticism is blameworthy when it is following other than Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, other human beings, other individuals, their opinions, to follow them blindly and be fanatic about them, this is blameworthy. Because why? Because they were fallible. They were not infallible. They made mistakes. They will make mistakes. They were human beings. So therefore, it is wrong for us to rigidly follow any human being besides Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Our shahada is our declaration of fanatically following Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, fanatically following that way, meaning we know that is the correct way, and anything which goes against this way is incorrect. No ifs, ands, and buts. Anything which contradicts the way of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is wrong. Right? And that is fanatic. That is fanatical, right? But it is the right fanaticism. Just as we say, anything which contradicts the Quran of any of the other scriptures is wrong. People did it. They introduced it. The Quran is 100% the word of Allah. That is fanatical. Now, because some people make a distinction here, because some people will say, well, you know, these are modern times when all the different people, so many societies, this is, globalization. We need to be, reasonable and be able to accept and to appreciate the other books of revelation and these religions. No. What we have to accept is that the only authentic book of revelation is the Quran. All the others are inauthentic. Now, they may contain some elements of the truth. We don't have to say everything in your book is false, no. But everything in our book is correct. And we stand firm on that. And that's fanatical people. Others who are into what they call interfaith dialogue, right? The attitude that they try to breed is this, what you have is okay, what I have is okay, we're all okay, this kind of attitude, right? But really, this is not correct. This was not the methodology of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He came with the truth, everything else was batil, it's clear, it is false, and we call to that truth. This is the truth. And we are fanatical about it. But methodology, how do you reach those people who don't understand that truth? Whether it is the Quran or whether it is the Sunnah, the Madhab of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how do you reach those people? Then you have to use a method which will aid you in conveying. Now, when you are going to try to reach them, you don't start off by saying, you are going to hell, you and your family and all your people. It's not the way. This is not the way. Yeah, it's true, but you don't have to say it, you see, because that just closes doors, closes people's ears, etc. So there are certain things you don't need to say in the beginning, it is there, but you want to elevate them to the point where they can come to that understanding themselves. So you're going to use, you're going to use wisdom. This is the thing. Allah tells us, Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah wal maw'idatil hasana. Call to the way of your Lord with wisdom. That's with the Quranic methodology, the way of the Sunnah, etc., the Sahaba, and good speech. You don't want to be insulting people. No. So this goes now back to methodology. And in the same way, if you said now, well, shouldn't we read their books? When Omar, this is to increase our understanding and the clarity. And when Omar was reading some portion of the Torah, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ caught him, asked, what are you doing? He said, I was reading this, trying to get this understanding. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, if Musa was here, he would follow what I brought, right? Meaning here, you don't go to the Torah to seek guidance. No, the guidance is in the Quran. But if you are looking into this book to get information to help you to guide these people to the Quran and the truth, then yes, it's legitimate, right? But again, if your foundations are shaky, you only just came to realize Islam, yeah, I need to practice Islam, and then you're going to go digging into their books. No, you're still just growing in Islam. Build your foundation first. Establish a solid foundation in understanding the Quran and the Sunnah in this way, etc. Then after that is established, then you can go to look to help to guide others. So if your knowledge is shaky, about Islam, then I would advise you, no, don't go into these books. Even with the best of intentions, you will get lost because you don't have a foundation. That's for people who have built a solid foundation. They can now look for the purpose of conveying the message.
Can we have the next question from the sister's side?
Hello, there's a question. I just want to know why these four imams are given so much importance, why they are so prior.
Sister's question, why is so much priority given to these four imams? Well, there are a number of factors which led to their being most popular. Some of it had to do with political factors. Some of it had to do with the quality of the students that they had, whether they were able to convey their rulings, etc., effectively or not. There's a number of factors. But the tendency that there be outstanding individuals in any given area, any given time, this is the norm for human society, you know. We could say, why is Dr. Zakir Naik so popular? When there are other people who are also doing what he's doing. Why? Because in this area, he is the leading figure in that particular area of da'wah. He is most known by people, and that has brought him to the forefront. Some of it has to do with the knowledge he has also researched and gathered, etc. So there are factors which cause certain individuals to stand out more so than others. Those people who are around him are more active. Maybe there's somebody else who has more knowledge than him, but the people around him are inactive. They're sleeping. So the knowledge is not really propagated and spread. So the point is not why we had four. This is our legacy. We have inherited it. The history of how they appeared, etc. I wrote a book called The Evolution of Fiqh. You know, one of the books which is mentioned here. You know, this book basically goes through and analyzes the whole evolution of the schools of Islamic law, where they came from, why they arose, and all the different history. All of it is compiled in this, which is from a course which I did when I was studying my master's in Islamic studies. So that can give you the kind of historical information you may be looking for. But what is most important for us, as I said today, is not so much as why we got here, but what do we need to do to go from here? How do we go forward from here? What do we need to be, what should be our priorities, what should be our focus? And this is what I try to clarify to you with regards to the madhab of Rasoolullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.
All right, can we have the next question from...
Oh, well, give this brother in the front, he's been sticking up his hand for a long time. Give him a break.
People following particular madhab say we still have a single way to follow, which indirectly goes to the Prophet ﷺ. But you people who don't follow a particular madhab are having a lot of confusion, or either you are following blindly Bukhari and Muslim.
Okay, those who are following scholars who were trained in any of the methodologies of the various madhabs, when evidence comes to them to the contrary, they will follow that evidence, even if it is from another madhab. Then they are following the madhab of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's true. Because the scholar you follow, it doesn't really matter what madhab he's following. If he was trained in a particular madhab or not, right? The point is how he is presenting the material to you. Is he giving you the evidences? Is it based on Quran and Sunnah, etc.? Is he reputable? Is he known to have gained the knowledge from reliable sources? Is he practicing? So once you have somebody of that nature, then you follow their knowledge. You know, it is true that, as they say, the common people are all blind followers, muqallideen, right? They have one area of ijtihad only. That area of ijtihad is who they're going to follow, right? They can make their ijtihad, they can look around, they see different scholars here. They check this one, they check that one, check the other one. And the one who seems to be the most reliable, he's bringing the evidences, he doesn't mind being questioned, etc., they're following him. That's their ijtihad. They made their ijtihad. And then the rest of the way is following. Until somebody else, if they go into another class and they're learning from somebody else and they find information which contradicts what they're saying, but this person has more evidence, then they follow that. But the issue of following, this is the norm for the masses of people. And even the scholars themselves end up following. But the point is, do we follow blindly in the sense that we will not change our opinion or accept another position if it is given by anyone other than the one who we're studying from or other than the school we're studying under? This is the point. Where we take that position where we're not going to accept anything else, then we have become blind followers of the madhab, and this, as I said before, is in opposition to our shahada. This is attacking the root of following the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ only blindly.
There is a question from the annex, an auditorium when people can see us but they cannot question us from there. It's an interesting question. He says, is it important to discuss subjects like this? Because by discussing these things, we end up distancing people from us. Rather, we should focus on Quran and Tawheed and such subjects, since there is so much shirk around us. If we give importance, if we ignore these subjects like Quran and Tawheed, we will be guilty of the sin of concealing these issues from the masses.
There is no doubt that the most fundamental da'wah or fundamental principle of da'wah should be to Tawheed. And this is where I began. I began with the concept of one God, one human race, one message. Because the concept of Tawheed, when we deal with the Shahada, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasoolullah, it requires both aspects. One, the oneness of Allah, and secondly, following the Messenger of Allah. How do we follow the Messenger of Allah? That does require clarity. This is why I spoke on the topic. And of course, whenever knowledge comes, there will be those who can recognize it, can accept it and follow it, and those who won't. Whether you're talking about Tawheed, or whether you're talking about fiqh, or you're talking about seerah, or whatever, this is going to happen, So I don't feel that discussing this topic is divisive. I feel it is a necessary clarification where there is confusion existing among Muslims with regards to the madhabs. To understand that the very scholars of those so-called madhabs, they were in fact following or trying their best to follow the madhab of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we best follow them by following what they were following.
Yes, brother.
Well, my question is, I listened one cassette where the scholar said the most beloved creation the most beloved human being in the creation of Allah Ta'ala was Prophet Muhammad, and Allah did this in such a way that all the sunnahs, different sunnahs of the Prophet is alive, practiced. So the madhabs are basically the revival of those different sunnahs of the Prophet. So, my friends, they got, satisfaction, and they stopped discussing these issues. They said, whatever we are doing is from Allah Ta'ala, because we are in the part of reviving the dead sunnahs of Rasulullah Sallallahu. The way of praying in different methods, the prayers are basically from Allah Ta'ala, because Rasulullah Sallallahu was the most beloved to him, and he wanted in this way that the different sunnahs are practiced. So what is your, in the light of Quran and Sunnah, the explanation to this this thing?
Well, I'm not quite sure I'm getting exactly what you're trying to get at here. Is it, you're suggesting that the different madhabs represent revival or conveyance of different sunnahs of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Well, that statement is of course inaccurate. Because if we look in the various madhabs, as I mentioned to you, where in the Shafi'i madhab now people are patting themselves on the front of their heads, right? Imam Shafi'i never taught that. So what is now called madhab may contain many things which were not from the teachings of Imam Shafi'i himself or his students or the early generations. People have added and added and added, as time has gone on. Some of it is improvement, some of it was degeneration. So we cannot address what exists in the books of the madhabs today and assume from it that it represents the protection or saving or compilation of the sunnah. No, there are many rulings in there which came from different eras and different times, which would make the average person blush. You can find in books, I don't know whether I mentioned this before in a lecture I gave here before, but when I was visiting the New Muslim, New Converts Association in Singapore, and I looked at their book, which they were giving out as a standard book for new Muslims, explaining, the principles of Islam. This book was a translation from a book written originally in Urdu. What it was, this book that he translated the material from, was an old book which was from the era, early era, where people had gotten into what they called scholastic arguments about issues of the madhab. They went into what they call speculative fiqh. And this was a result of a particular era in time. There was a time when the Abbasid rulers, what they used to do, as they had in their entourage, in the court, they would have different means of entertainment. Like today we have television, movies, all these other videos and these things that people watch for entertainment. In those days, they had different people who would entertain them. They would have a court jester, one his job was to make the caliph and his entourage laugh. He'd tell jokes, do funny things, like comedians we have today. Then they had also singing girls. They'd have women who would come and sing songs and, which of course is haram, right? But they had a court astrologer. If the ruler, he wanted to know what should he do, should he fight this battle, should he do, the astrologer would tell him all this sign, you're a Libra and this is that, and so they had court astrologers. Again, haram, they had different things. Among the things which were there in the court for the entertainment of the caliph and his entourage were the court scholars. This was now intellectual entertainment. So what they would do, they would have a scholar from the Shafi'i madhab and one from the Hanafi, because those were the main two at the time. Basically, Maliki was small, Hanbali had almost died out altogether. So they would have a Hanafi Shafi'i scholar, and then they would throw out an issue of fiqh. And the two scholars would debate back and forth and so on, so on, so on, till one of them won. The one who won would get a little bag of gold from the caliph, his prize for winning the argument. Now, when they began this process, they used to argue about actual fiqh issues. But you can imagine, as years passed, they eventually ran out of real fiqh issues. Then they started to make things up. What if? And what if? And then they went to the point where they brought things which are just amazing, things which are completely fictitious. And among these issues, which ended up in this book, I was reading this book, which was in the New Convert Association, they were talking about the things which break wudu. And among the things which they mentioned which break wudu, they said, having sexual relations with a fish. Now, if any sane human being read that, non-Muslim, what do you think they would think about Muslims? What are these people into? But it is found in the books, in the old Hanafi fiqh books. There was another mas'ala, for example, in old Shafi'i fiqh books, coming out of that era, where they debated if a person passed wind into a bag, paper bag, right? And you closed the bag, tied it. Then you made wudu. Then you opened the bag and let the wind out. Is your wudu broken? But this is the product of that era. And it is there in the madhab. And I remember there was one issue which Sheikh Nasruddin Al-Albani was debating with this scholar from Albania also. The mufti actually, is debating with him, discussing with him about this issue of madhab and positions and ijtihad, because of course that man was a graduate from Azhar and their position was ijtihad finished. The books, everything is worked out. So he asked him about prayer on an airplane. Can a person pray on an airplane? So the mufti said, sure, yes, he can. He can make prayer on an airplane. So he asked him, did you make ijtihad? Did you just make ijtihad? Because surely there were no airplanes around in the early books, right? So he said, no, I'm basing it on prayer on a ship, which they did do prayer on the ship. Prophet ﷺ okayed it. So he said, that's ijtihad. That is your ijtihad right there. You have made qiyas, by qiyas, your analogy, you've compared the praying on a ship in the water with prayer on an airplane. So he was stuck. And he said, he accepted it. Okay, yes, I guess I had to. It was necessary. He said, actually, that ijtihad that you just made contradicts your madhab. He said, yes. He said, how? So he said, in the madhab, and he mentioned the name of the book, the chapter and everything, they were discussing, this is one of the from that same era. If a man were to pray on a swing, on a piece of board that you normally swing on, a piece of board, pray on a swing, which was not connected to anything from above or below, not connected to anything above or below, means he's suspended above the earth, would his prayer be valid? And the ruling of the madhab was no, it would not be valid. And he said, what is the airplane? But exactly that. Right? Anyway, the point is that we follow the school's rulings where they are in agreement with the text from the Quran and the Sunnah as understood by the Sahaba, and where they are not in agreement, we leave them. And that was the position held by the early scholars themselves anyway.
We have time for just two more questions. One question from the sister's side, one from the brother's side. Can we have the next question from the sister's side?
Give that. From the brother's side, you can give it to that brother there. He's been having his hand up for a long time. After the sisters.
Do we have a question from the sister's side?
Brother, sometimes a problem arises which is not mentioned in Quran and Hadith. So in this situation, can we follow Imam? And if the Imams are different opinions, so which Imam can we follow?
If an issue is not mentioned in the Quran or the Hadith, can we follow the opinion of a scholar on it? Well, there is much of the rulings of fiqh today which is not directly mentioned in the Quran and Hadith, but it is based on information contained in it. So where, for example, a ruling is deduced based on the Quran and Hadith, but not an actual statement, then we accept that ruling, but not necessarily permanently. For example, scholars of the past ruled that smoking cigarettes was makruh. Many scholars held that position because they could not see in smoking any harm beyond bad breath. Smoking produced bad breath. And going back to the Sunnah, there is hadith where Prophet ﷺ said, whoever eats raw onions or garlic should not pray in our mosques. Stay home. So it's considered makruh to eat raw onions and garlic and come to the masjid. Why? Because the breath, the bad breath that comes from eating raw onions and garlic is harmful to those around us. When we finish our salah saying, Salaam alaikum wa rahmatullah, right? Person who's eating garlic is torturing his people who are praying next to him. So Prophet ﷺ said, better you stay home and you miss out on the 27 additional times your prayer, blessings for your prayers. So the ruling was makruh. Now, from 1979, when the Surgeon General of the United States of America informed the public that it had been conclusively proven that smoking causes cancer, and all the smoking, the cigarette companies are now forced to put on the bottom of their cigarette boxes, cause dangerous, hazardous to health, and cancer causing all these different things, and they're not doing it out of concern for the public. They're doing it because they were obliged. Now we have that information, then the ruling of scholars of our time who have this additional information that smoking in fact is haram because cancer causes death, and the Sharia rules as haram anything which you take, which you know can kill you, you take that deliberately, this is haram. So those scholars have followed the spirit of the Sharia and changed the ruling based on additional information. So when scholars deduce rulings, these rulings are not etched in stone. They are rulings which may change based on new information. So we are at liberty to follow them. We're at liberty to follow them. That's the most knowledgeable individuals amongst us. They made this ijtihad and they gave us this ruling. We follow it. But if later on additional information comes where a scholar now is able to deduce a more accurate ruling based on, more closely based to the Quran and Sunnah, then we have to follow that new ruling or that other ruling.
Last question from...
Yeah, this brother.
There are some scholars' opinion that four major madhabs are acceptable, and that is the four entrance to Islam. But if you have a good knowledge of hadith, then no need to stick any madhab. Otherwise, follow anyone. To avoid this confusion, we can prefer Salafi. But there is a question against Salafi that some of the practice of the Salafi is not practiced in any madhab. So even today also, from where they are getting the authentic hadith from the Salafi, which is not collected from the past scholars.
Any position held by a so-called Salafi which is not found in the evidences of the scholars of the past, then that particular argument is error. Because a person today may be trying to follow that particular path, etc., and he comes to a conclusion, it doesn't necessarily mean that every ruling he makes is now going to be correct. So we still have to look at the evidences. If he brings evidence, where is he going to bring evidence from? Either it's going to be from Quran, or it's going to be from Sunnah, or it's going to be some explanation of the Sahaba, or of the Tabi'een, or something like this. This is what he's going to base his evidence on. He's not going to bring it out of nowhere. If he brings it out of nowhere, then he's in error, clearly. So, if you find a ruling, for example, where none of the four madhabs, and this is very rare, where none of the known four madhabs follow this particular ruling today, still, if that position which the scholar has put forth is based on an earlier ruling by some of the other scholars who are not from the four, then it is legitimate. And you have to look at the arguments of the four, why they didn't take this position, and if the argument of that other scholar who was either their contemporaries, came after or came before, is in fact a stronger position, then that's what you follow. It's just as simple as that. As I said, the 4 schools in general encompass the Sunnah, but I can't say 100%, but in general is encompassed by. But it's not impossible that one of the scholars outside of those 4, because as I said, there are, I mentioned in my book, about 12 great Imams. 12. We have 4 now. What about the rulings of the other 8? And more. This is just 8 out of many. Does it mean their rulings are just irrelevant? No. Much of what they ruled was absorbed by the well-known 4. But it doesn't mean every single ruling they made was. So if they had other evidences which they built their ruling on from that period of time, it is also as legitimate to take that as to take it from any of the main 4. Just as legitimate. As long as what people are presenting is based on evidence, not just opinion and feeling and desire.